Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the studio this evening. I had to think then, it's a Saturday night, isn't it? I couldn't remember. I've just had a really weird occasion. Really weird. Something really weird happened. I just poured some water out of my fridge over the top of some ice cubes, and I can't quite show you it, but all of a sudden the water suddenly turned to ice. Never seen that happen before. I've seen people do that trick with beer, super cold beer, but I've never seen it happen with ice before. Alright, just changing my glasses again so I can see better. And now some of this cold water. That's nice. Virtually frozen water, it's lovely. Or I think it's lovely anyway. Right. Let's have a little bit of light. Yes, that's a little bit. We'll leave it like that for the moment. Oh, bother. One of the things I meant to do today and completely forgot was to get out a sharpening stone. I shall get out a sharpening file instead. Fear Reaper 7, good evening, welcome to the studio. She'll be back with you in just a moment. I'm either going to have to find a new tool bag or some of the strong thread that they used to sew leather with, because my mine is falling apart. Thank you very much for that comment, Fear Reaper. So I'm just going to file this tool a little bit. I have no idea what effect this is going to have on it. It may have absolutely none. Or it may work very well. We shall find out in a moment. Feel Livia. Can I show it? Well, I can, but it literally is just me doing that just down the side of this tool here. That was all. Nothing Nothing especially exciting about it, but good evening. Welcome to the studio. Feel Live R, or Feel Live R, I guess. Good evening. Right. No problem. I don't know if it's going to work. It's the first time I've tried it. I did mean to try and dig out a sharpening stone that I've got, which I used to sharpen box knives with, which would potentially have done that sort of job. But I'm a cheapskate, you see. I don't want to get another one of these things out. And they come in boxes of 12. And I've got another 11 in here. But yeah, I'm a cheapskate. I mean, there kind of looks to be nothing wrong with it. It was slightly blunt, but there looks to be nothing wrong with it. So I didn't really want to throw it away. Live in fear. Okay, yeah, makes sense. What's the catchphrase? Yeah, that's the sort of thing. I don't know if you are from the UK, never seen that. So is it Fee Live R, or is it Live in Fear that you wish to be known as? Clever use of it, by the way. Right. So what I was doing on the last stream was just increasing the brightness and adding sort of texture, and that filing does seem to have worked quite nicely to these stones that are around here. So they were a little dim, so I'm needing to brighten them up a bit. Now, to brighten them up a bit, add more scratches basically, which is what I'm doing, but I'm being very light in doing that. So I don't suddenly scrape everything away. Feel if ear. Feel if ear. Okay, I shall. I might make the odd mistake, but I shall try and remember that. Feel live ear. Thank you very much. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see more of the area I'm working on rather than I think that's about focused. Don't think I've ever had a keyboard do that other than so when did I develop an affinity for this type of art? Arts, there's two answers to that question. One answer to it, which is specifically to do with Scraperboard, is this is exactly my third ever piece in Scraperboard. So I'm developing an affinity for it rather. Let me just get rid of a hair across the lens there because it's bugging me. So I'm developing an affinity for it, but this is a form of monochrome artwork which I also do pyrography, which is a form of monochrome artwork. And I also I also do airbrushing, not on stream, but I do airbrushing. And I first started doing monochrome artwork in with the airbrush, and I really enjoyed doing that white on black, like this is to some extent. And because of that, that's why I started doing the pyrography, and then kind of came into this as well from that. So it's an extension really on me enjoying doing monochrome style of artwork, working in a single colour. Generally speaking, against black, but I have done black on white with the airbrushing. I'm not as good at that, assuming you think I'm good at it now, but I am a lot better at the white on black. But the black on white, or anything on white, means you can use other colours as well. So you could do blue on white or red on white. You can't do white on red or white on blue, something like that. It just doesn't work. Well, that's not strictly true. It does work, provided you don't try and put the background colour back over the top. One of the things you do with airbrushing, if you're playing white on black, is you'll tidy it up by going around with black, or you might dim it down by going over with black. If you're using a blue background, for example, and you try that, you get some really weird colours, but you can do blue on white, okay, that's not a problem. And this obviously is, well, I'd say this is obviously white on black. You can get versions of this which have instead of containing porcelain clay that this does, will contain silver foil or gold foil, copper foil, even sort of some rainbow type mylar. So there are other colours of this as well, but so far this is all I've tried. And generally what I want to work on or work towards tonight is to be able to fill in between these brick or these blocks with the mortar, so that they don't appear to be floating in mid-air, which is what they are doing at the moment. Do you do any form of art, feel live ear? I'm practicing. You will see me dotting around, not specifically starting in one corner or anything like that. No particular reason, just I find it a little bit more interesting to just dot around and do odd bits and pieces around rather than start in one corner and work from there. That filing definitely had a good impact. If you want to shut the window, you can do. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to be really light about this, so I'm only gradually increasing the brightness. The camera does lie a little bit in that it looks a lot brighter in the camera than it does actually in person. that may, well, partly that is the camera adjusting its light levels, and it's actually a little bit fooled by the white balance, but it is also, you're looking at a very slightly different angle to me. You're looking at a slightly lower angle, so you're actually seeing a little bit more of the white than I do when I look straight down, because what I'm doing is creating like a V-shaped groove, generally speaking, and the lower you look at the groove, the more you see the side of it. And since the side is the white bit, that's why you're seeing more of it. I must admit though, those people who have obviously been on the stream a while, I say it often, but the camera is, when I'm looking up, by the way, that's what I'm looking at, is I'm looking at a screen which has got my camera output on it, the OBS output, and it's a very useful, it's a bit like when if you ever draw with a graphics tablet, where you draw down here but you're seeing the image on the screen in front of you. I'm kind of doing that, and it's actually letting me look at it with a slightly different perspective, and it's the view I get is a little bit like standing, about 2 or 3 paces back, which is an extremely useful view without having to get up and physically move backwards. Now I have to remember we've got a thatch and it will be creating a shadow, so I don't necessarily want to lighten, at this moment in time anyway, the stones that are just under the thatch, this sort of top area over where the window is really. May well do those later, but at this stage I want them to remain dimmer than the rest. Over here now. It was mentioned, I guess the other night, that it looks a bit like I'm looking upwards at something. This cam, the face cam, is actually sat on the desk pointing up at me, so I'm actually looking straight forward when I apparently put my head up, but since I'm looking down a lot, that's why the face cam's there rather than sort of on top of a monitor or something like that. Saves you looking at the top of my head most of the time. See, aren't I considerate of you guys? Actually, it just seemed like a waste of time putting a camera that was just looking at my head, top of my head most of the time. I didn't really feel that that was something that you were interested in, so. to some extent this, as we move further on now, we start to slow down in terms of apparent progress. Some of the early stages, lots of scratching going on to create this sort of just rough outline and sort of fill in the spaces. Now that we're actually moving down into sort of working with individual stones, it will actually slow down quite a bit. And actually you guys will probably see more of a dramatic change because of the way the camera's representing this, but they'll sort of, you know, with working on an individual stone level, and I am scraping now a lot slower than I was before. Again, you know, trying to put more control into this, then just to, you know, give you sort of an advance notice, if you like, that it's you're not going to see glaring lightning scraping going on. I was about to say glaring changes, but I think you perhaps will see quite strong changes going on, like just around here, how this starts to get light just with a few scratches. The things have to be a little bit careful of is I don't accidentally create sort of lines. As I'm working, if I work upwards, up and down with small scratches, then what can happen if I'm not careful is I can end up starting and stopping them all in the same place, and if I do that you get like a white mark or a white shadow, perhaps might be a better description of it, which forms like a vertical line. And now it might, you know, in the case of this being stone, it might just look like stone textures, but sometimes if you're after a fairly consistent tone, then that's something to avoid. It's the same with pyrography and the same with airbrushing. You've got to, when you're doing sort of lots of horizontal things, if you have to be careful not to start and stop in the same place, otherwise you generate a line. You try it yourself sometime with a pencil if you're looking for what the effect is. Scribble, you know, you maybe use the side of a pencil, create a vertical block of shade, then go to the side of it, and if you overlap what you've already done, you get a dark patch. So you end up trying not to, and then you generally leave yourself a white line, which is quite difficult. The trick is to do different lines of different lengths, so it's jagged, and then when you go over the edge you don't see it quite so much. I'm getting my weekends confused. I was thinking it was Sunday. It's not, of course, it's Saturday. Got a whole nother day off, which means I've got more work to do than if I was working. I did managed to do one thing today, which I'm going to which is fix some lights. So I'm just going to put some on. And we'll actually see if they stay on. Ow. You hurt yourself, Fear Reaper? Oh, you mean maybe the fact that I'm doing more work at the weekend than I do when I'm at work, yeah. Right, we'll see if these lights work. I changed the transformer in the loft today, which was overheating and shutting itself off, which it shouldn't have been, given that it was a 250 watt transformer with 75 watts of power. Oh, it's quite easy actually, Fear Reaper. If you think I work from home, I can go into an office, but I work from home. Sort of, I've got two offices, if you like, which, and quite frankly, the office is just across the room there, and so Monday to Friday I'm sat over there, evenings I'm sat here, and at weekends if I'm doing things on the computer then I'm sat here. But if I want to cut the grass, for example, I can do that Wednesday lunchtime, just to pick a day. And it basically means sometimes I literally have to look at a clock to see what day it is. Whether it's not just whether it's a weekend or not, and it's a long time since I've done it, but I have been known to get up on a Saturday, and one time when I used to go out to an office, I have been known to get up on a Saturday, get to the office, turn around and come back. But I don't do that very often. Here it's more a case of thinking, what day is it? Do I start? I'll get up at 8 o'clock, and it's kind of like, should I start work? Is it a Monday, Tuesday, or whatever? To go look at the clock to find out, because my clock has a date on it, which is why. Excuse me. That's lovely. Cold but fizzy water. Plus, of course, I'm getting old, so memory. But mainly, actually, days go really quickly the older you get, the quicker they go. I'm sure it is. I think Einstein and his friend were wrong. Although time is relative, I think it's relative to how old you are. Mind you, if time is anything like my relatives, then I could do without it. Right, I think they're probably light enough now to be able to start to put something in between them. So I'm just going to try and see whether I can do something which is dark enough to not be very visible, but light enough to be able to see. I did try sort of just putting like little dots in, but that didn't really work too well. They just didn't really show up. That's starting to show up a little bit, that's not bad. I usually get about 6. I ideally need about 8. But it actually often turns out to be nearly 2 o'clock in the morning when I actually manage to get into bed. And then I generally try to be up around about, that being the operative word, I try to get up around about 8 o'clock in the morning. Often though, it does tend to be close to 9 when I do actually manage to get out of bed, which isn't so bad, given that I work about 10 seconds away from where I get up, so I can get to work really fast. I wonder whether the fact that he only needed 3 hours sleep a night was because he got used to having 3 hours sleep a night, or whether he actually only ever needed 3 hours sleep a night. Because you can kind of get used to not having a lot of sleep, or rather not having very long a sleep. Your body kind of compensates by having more concentrated sleep in the time when you do sleep. Yep, filing definitely works on these tips. Which is great, because it does mean, as I mentioned at the start, I'm not going to be wasting them, or I'm not going to feel that I'm wasting them. By the time I file them to the point where they are literally no good, I'll have done quite a lot of work with them, so it won't feel like I'm just sort of chucking away stuff. Interestingly, I'm just thinking I could possibly use a different tool to do this if I had one. Something like a fiberglass cleaning pencil, would probably do this quite nicely. But the sharper tool actually allows me to scratch a little bit faster. He only needed. Okay, it's yeah. It's kind of it's kind of like the reason I was just the thought process that was going through my mind was it's kind of like I need 6 hours sleep a night, but that's because I've got used to having 6 hours nights of sleep a night. And if I go to bed early, for example, I don't go to sleep for quite a long time. I'll stay awake before I actually will drop off to sleep, and it's as though I've got I only need 6, and therefore I'm going to make sure I only get 6. But don't know. But yeah, obviously, whilst sleep is apparently important, it doesn't stop you being an absolute genius. I was going to say is if anybody ever feels like trying this out as an art form, then great. One of the tools that you can buy for it, I mentioned, was the fiberglass pencil. If you consider buying that, I would suggest go and look in a local car DIY store first. The shops badged as a scraperboard tool. The shops tend to be charging about 20, what would be in UK pounds, about 23 UK pounds. So that'd be what? About $32. Sorry, about 32 euros, and probably about $35 for something, which I am relatively certain in a car DIY place will be something like around 5 UK pounds and $7 and euros. Okay. Okay, Fwiffy Twiggler. I did look out for you first thing this morning. Then I got roped into cutting 2 hedges, and then I remembered I had to change a transformer in my loft, so I was otherwise occupied then for the rest of the day. But yeah, if you would like to post another link, that's okay. Let's have a look at what this looks like. That's going to pop up, so let me do it on this window. I like the sky. That's a nice sky. The lightning looks a little bit. The lightning looks a bit out of focus, soft. I can see what you've tried to do with it. You obviously want to get the glow from the lightning. I was going to say, interestingly, Photoshop has a glow brush. I don't know what effect that would have, but lightning would tend to be the core of the lightning, and yellow's an interesting colour. Most of the time it tends to be a blue or a purple colour, but yellow's a fine colour. You know, it's your picture, you can have it yellow if you want it yellow. But the core of lightning tends to be quite sharp if you ever see it in the sky. But I mean, you're doing an art form. You want it that way, you have it that way. You know, whatever I say is not relevant. But it does look quite good, and looks the bolts coming off it kind of look natural, even though it wouldn't do that naturally in real life. But it does look natural, which is good, because you've not got straight lines involved anywhere on it. They're all little tiny jagged bits, which is exactly what lightning does, so it looks real. Probably what I don't know if you're looking to improve the lightning, but because that's obviously the bit that I'm seeing. The background sky looks great. The grey and the black, and the cloud, sort of the way it's all mixed together. You've got shapes in there that look good. The way I was thinking about the lightning was it may well do. Yeah, you've done it on layers. I was just thinking it might help it look a little bit better if you use a slightly transparent colour rather than a solid colour. So you've got the white underneath, which is the bright bloom from it, which is right. If you maybe try 1 or 2 layers of the colour over the top of that, but make it a transparent, or reduce the opacity a little bit, so that it's colouring the white. And you may even get away with doing what would it be? Something like a colour, the layer. Oh god, my brain's gone. You know, you get like dodge layers, burn layers, things like that in Photoshop. If you make it a colour layer, then that will have you can then use a solid colour, but that one will have a yellow. It will have a transparent sort of look. Yeah, it's like flames with lightning, and play about with the there is a glow brush, I think, in Photoshop. Play about with that, because that has some really nice look to it. If something lightning, if you think of lightning as a tube, or like a rod, just as an example, then it's circular, and your brightest bits slap bang down the centre, and then it gets dimmer as it comes out. So what you might want to do, and we do the same thing with airbrushing, is you've got your white down, you then lay your yellow, in your case, over the top, obviously leaving an area on the edge which is white. Then layer another colour down the middle, and depending on how fat the lightning is, which doesn't go all the way to the ends of the yellow, and then you layer really quite a light bright yellow, or in your case yellow. You possibly even could get away with almost white as well, right down the centre. So you've got the strike which is sort of coming outwards, if you see what I mean. But that's going to look good, is that? It really is. A nice use of layers, by the way. I'm just looking at some of them there. Doesn't have to make your life easier, doesn't it? But I love that dark sky. It's really good, is that? It's really good, and you've got the right the lightness in where the strike is, the grey coming out from it. It looks just right. That's really good. Well done. I shall look forward to seeing some more of that. It's nice to see it develop. Give this a bit more of a file. I know what I ought to try for doing something like this. My one of my friends is diabetic, and they've got a finger pricker, and it's got a big blob of plastic, but then it's got a really sharp needle, well, relatively sharp needle on the end of it, little tiny one. What I might have to do is I was about to say borrow, but he's not going to want it back. Get one of those from him and just see how that goes, because they're quite a sharp needle. They're sort of hypodermic type sharp, so try one of those for scratching things, see how long they last on clay. I know you can buy them, but in the UK, if you are diabetic, you can get them on prescription, so you don't need to. But even in the UK, if you just want to monitor your own blood sugar, you can go out and buy a blood glucose meter and get the things like the finger prickers and the test strips over the counter. Yeah, that should start even to you guys. Look, yeah, you can now see how it looks sort of grey in between the stones. It looks like there's something joining them together now. So there's some mortar there, which is what I wanted it to look like. So you can see this kind of now looks like it's a wall, whereas this still looks like it's floating a little bit in by magic. So it's at a funny angle. Again, that's just so it's easier for me to work at, and I can't get a camera around to look at it from the other angle, so I'm afraid you'll just need to see it this way up for a little while. Excuse me. So now I'll move on to doing this side here. Same thing again, just really light scratches. That bit I'm leaving black for the moment. That's the inside edge of the... What I should actually do is wrap these blocks around, because that's the inside edge of the window cutout. So these blocks should actually wrap around, but I'm going to do those afterwards. Just to illustrate this side here, you can see how the blocks wrap around to create the sort of the window cutout. And I need to do that on the other side, on this window, but I'm just going to do all this mortaring first. I wish it was this easy in real life. It's quite possible with an old house like this that this mortar isn't actually holding the bricks together like it would do on a modern house. These will be more what's referred to as pointing in a modern house, and it's just filling up the outside, just putting some material in the gaps between to stop ingress of water and wind. Although having said which, if a house using dry stone type techniques has been constructed well, you wouldn't have any. It's like log cabins. Log cabins, you might first think there's going to be a lot of wind, but if they're constructed well, then you don't get that. I wouldn't know if you spelt it right, but it looks okay to me, Fluffy Twiggler. My spelling is interesting. And especially because I have a tendency, well, at work we tend to have the spell checker for some reason defaults to American spelling, even though we're in England, and then it's always throwing up words which of course the Americans spell differently to the UK, which then doesn't help with spelling either. Okay. Well, I mean, it's all about experimenting. So, and whatever looks right to you, it doesn't. To be honest, it doesn't matter what I or anybody else think. If it's what you're after, then it's okay. So don't try something just because of a comment of mine that I make. I will freely admit I've done exactly one fork of lightning, and I was doing it wasn't doing it on a picture, if you like. I was just trying things out. I don't know what I'm talking about, really. As I say, it's I did it with the airbrush. I was about to say, you can't get luminous colours with an airbrush. You kind of have to make them up as you go along. At this stage, at least until you've coloured in your, and I don't mean that crayon-wise, but until you've applied colour to those central three characters, that lightning fork is your main focal point, and it is one of the elements that will draw your eye towards the centre of the image as well. So. As do I, Fluffy Twiggler. I'm quite happy for people to tell me it could be improved if. It's the people that come in and say, that's horrible, and then disappear. Yeah, okay, fine, so what? It's the constructive bit that helps, isn't it? But the key word there, Fear Reaper, is professional, and you may well have, shall we say, a carefully constructed impression of what a professional is, which I think everybody naturally has this. This professional, an image of it in their own mind. A professional is somebody who is paid to do it. That's it. Everybody thinks a professional is expert. Nope. Professional is somebody who is paid to do it. It is their profession, which is where the work comes from. A profession is work for which you get paid. So some professionals wouldn't. You will already be better than some professionals. Somebody who's just started is a professional. Just started working doing it, has just started, so they're a professional, but you may be better. So don't be careful in your own mind. Don't link professional with good. The other thing you get professionals doing is professionals are paid. They're paid to do something fast, okay? Because time is money. The longer it takes, the more it costs. People don't want to pay lots of money. So professionals will find quick ways around things. They'll also find ways of not doing more than they need to do. So it's the sort of thing where instead of covering a model with loads of greebles, they'll cover it with a texture that looks like it's got loads of greebles on, because the texture is 2D and is easier to do, for example. So if they've got lots of surface detail, they won't put it on the 3D model, they'll put it on the texture, because 99% of the time you won't see that, because the way in which it's rendered, etc., will hide the fact that it's not part of the 3D model. And they'll do things like know when to use low polygon counts for the modelling, which obviously speeds lots of things up, and start playing about with the surface normals and some of the other techniques of specular light and stuff like that, which will make things look better than they've actually produced, so they get it done faster. So it is almost certainly possible that whatever you're doing now is better than most professionals will provide, and especially if you think when it's being animated, because some part of it may only be on screen for a dozen frames. Most people won't see it, so don't worry about it. Yeah, but you can't assume they know what to do. You really can't. Somebody who's been doing it a long time, yes. A professional has been doing it for years. You can assume that they know what they're doing for what they do. And if they don't do insane asylums, then you still may be better than they are. Okay? Really, don't measure yourself against professionals. It's a bad measure against professionals. Pick a person that does work that you admire, measure yourself against that, okay, because that's a measure of how you are learning and how you are developing. But just against the general professional, no. The trick of it's a sales technique, or a sales trick if you like, is when you go into a customer, if you know the answer to their next question, then they think you know a lot. So effectively, if you're one step ahead of them, that's all you need to be, one step ahead of them at any point, they think you are an expert. And you may just know that, it may just be that you know this little bit more than they do. Therefore, they see you as an expert. The professional, and there are many a time when I have been described as a professional, and yet I know I've known just a little bit more than the person that has made that comment. You don't turn around and say, no, I'm not, because the definition of professional is somebody who gets paid for it. So I'm not telling fibs. Yep, indeed. Fluffy twiglet. Indeed. And the professional that thinks that they know everything they need to know, everything about a subject, is the professional you don't want to measure yourself against. Well, I hope it's not too much like school, and it's a little bit more fun and jolly and whatever. For me, it's fun to pass on some experience, but and maybe what I'm doing is just staying one step ahead of the audience here. Just bear that in mind. But sometimes it's fun to just pass on experience of things. I don't ever want to be telling you this is the way to do something, or this is what you should do. what I want to be doing is saying, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing here. If it applies to what you're doing, great. If it doesn't, toss it, you know. But I'll quite happily talk about lots of things, not just art lessons. I think actually that's the subject of things like professionals and measuring yourself. It applies to other stuff besides art, but it's something I often saying to. I used to do lecturing, so occasionally we get new people coming in to the team who would be really afraid of, standing up in front of an audience, which is effectively what it is, when you're teaching is, and giving a lecture, especially the ones that we were doing, because we were lecturing to people who were experts in their field, or relatively speaking, going around all this, what's an expert type of thing, but who had been doing, some of them were doing stuff that, you could describe them as experts. They'd been doing it for years. They were really good at it, and quite a few of them were better than I were. But I knew the new bit. They didn't. That's why they were there to learn. And that's when you get somebody new who's not done lecturing before, they used to get really daunted, really afraid of all these people, and because those people knew more than they did. But the point being is they didn't know the bit that person was lecturing, which is why they were there. And so that's a subject that came up with those guys. And even if they do, most of them were, if you like, professional enough to know that, there's not much point in heckling the lecturer, because they were there to learn. They were there to pick up the new stuff, and they understood, if you like, as professionals, in quotes, that everybody has to learn and start from somewhere. Yeah. I've no idea whether this is like you get in a university. I've only ever been to what was then called technical college. They're called universities these days, but technical college. So whilst some of the classes were actually held in the university building, I've never actually been to a university lecture. Okay, I think that looks. These stones just at the top here. I was off frame, wasn't I? These stones at the top here are now a bit dim. You can't see. You can see. I intended to try and represent a bit of the shadow. It probably didn't work too well. You can't really see them now. It merges with a mortar, so I probably will just ignore the shadow, or at least at this stage. I might try and make these, what would be lit rather than in shadow, a bit brighter. But it looks like I'm going to need to just increase the brightness of these couple of stones up here, just under the thatch, because they just disappear now into the background. There we go, they now stand out a bit better. Okay, why did it get frustrating for you, Reaper? As I mentioned, I've only ever been to technical college. That was frustrating in at least in at least 2 classes actually that I had. One of the classes was teaching a technique. So I was teaching. It was a telecommunications class, and I did mention I've worked for telecommunications firms. So in one class they were teaching what was my job, literally. So I knew it backwards, sort of, if you like. I was an expert. And the lecturer was wrong in quite a bit of it, and that was really frustrating because he wouldn't accept he was wrong, even when I offered the opportunity for him to come and see it for himself. He refused. So for the rest of that module I had to give the wrong answers, which was really hard, trying to remember what the wrong answers were, because naturally if you're doing it for a job, you just know the right answers. And the other one was microprocessor, not design, but microprocessor programming, and it was a 6800 CPU, so an old one. But by that time I was writing 6502 microprocessor code. Now this is obviously a long time ago, but I was writing 6502 microprocessor code. I was writing. I'd written enough so that there's a language, if you're not familiar with it, called assembler. Assembler is almost as close a language as you can get to programming the ones and zeros, and effectively it is the ones and zeros, but they are operational codes. So move this from there to there, add that to that, and that's about. You've not got many more instructions than that back then anyway. There's probably a few hundred now, but it's still quite a really efficient language, but you really have to understand the machine. And I was assembler would be things like add, and then ADD, and then a 05. And you were writing in hexadecimal, so that would be 5. Move register A to a particular memory location. That would be so MOV, because the implied register A, so MOV 65, and things like that. And I'd actually knew enough to be able to write the actual hex codes as well. So I'd done it long enough and translated it, because when I was doing it back then on the 6502. Frozen screen. Thank you very much for following. That's absolutely fantastic of you. I really appreciate you doing that. It's an art stream and I'm talking about 6502 assembler. But back then we didn't have assemblers, or I didn't, so I had to translate it by hand. And then when it came to that particular class, 6800 and 6502 are almost the same. And the lecturer would give homework, and he'd always do it in the last 10 minutes of the class, and I never bothered to write. He'd write it on the board. It'd be something like, I don't know, program a traffic light, for example. I never used to write down what he asked us to do. I just wrote down the answer. I could write the code that fast that I could actually do it before he'd finished, or as he finished writing it. But that made that, and of course therefore the rest of the class, it made that class really frustrating, because everybody else would take a 2-hour module to do something like blink an LED, and I would just write the code, and then it would be I ended up helping a lot of people in that class. It goes too fast with the theoretical stuff. Okay, don't forget though, you can ask questions. Well, I'm assuming you can ask questions. Certainly with technical college, that was something that was encouraged. If you didn't understand, ask the question. And challenge them to explain it in a way in which you can understand. I know there are some lecturers that absolutely hate that and don't like it and won't let you do it, but there are some that like it when people do that, or they did when I was at college, which is 30 odd years ago, 35 years ago, something like that. So things do change. Anyway, I'm getting with some more of this, shouldn't I? Especially with Frozen Screen having just subscribed. Got to give him some value for money at the moment. Blimey, I've just looked at the time. Time has passed somewhat more quicker than I thought. For those people who are watching, and since Frozen Screen reminded me, anybody who's watching that isn't following, I do obviously. I say obviously, it may not be obvious, but I do appreciate you doing it. It's fantastic to know that people want to follow you, to come back and see what you're doing and how you're doing it, etc. So that's just a reminder. And there is also a Twitter message goes out when I go live as well, for those people that would just like to be notified. So you can follow me. The details are below the window, but it's at Zeragonart. And as I'm fond of saying, I tweet when I go live, not when I have my breakfast. So any tweets will be related to art in some shape or form. The other thing for you, Frozen Screen, anybody else, is whilst this is Scraperboard, it's only one of the things that I do on stream. I do various other crafts or arts, bit of a grey areas to what they are, I guess. I do pyrography, scraperboard, which is this, carving, relief carving that is, with hand tools. Do some jewellery, which is technically is chainmail, but I tend not to refer to it as that because I don't make armour. It's pretty coloured rings and bangles and things like that. I don't think there'd be many people would want to wear pink armour or something like that. Maybe they would. What's the other one? Punchcraft. So, which is a bit like miniature rug making. So, and I tend to do those in sequence. So, we've finished some pyrography about a week ago. Moved on to doing scraperboard. Next one after this is complete will be probably the punchcraft, I think. And then we would do jewellery after that before going back on to doing some carving. I have no idea what I'll be doing next for carving. I haven't particularly thought of a subject just yet. I was thinking about for punchcraft, since I've already done one locomotive, possibly doing another one, maybe one of the steam locomotives, possibly Mallard, an A4 Pacific, which is a steam speed record holder. That may be an interesting one to do. And for the jewellery, I'm not sure what it would be. I've been this afternoon, I didn't stream this afternoon, but I was playing about with some titanium rings. So instead of aluminium, some that are made out of titanium. Oh, no, that won't focus. Let me just see if I can focus to show you. There we go. So these are a blue and a red anodized titanium, which is really hard to work. Titanium's a hard metal, so I was playing with two, so two different weaves. There we go. Small rings, but I kind of like the small. Working with the small rings. I have got some rubber rings to actually experiment with. So these are actually made out of neoprene, so they stretch. So I was thinking about trying to maybe incorporate these into a bracelet without a clasp. So just make a total round bracelet, which is then stretchy. Of course, you can stretch out to put it on. So I got yellow because yellow's my wife's favourite colour, though she doesn't like what she calls rubber rings. She might like the bracelet when it's done, but we'll see. So I might do that next on one of the when I come to do the jewellery stream. Let me refocus this camera now back down onto what I'm doing. Yeah, sorry, I'm just reading back. Fear Reaper. Yeah, I agree. Object orientation I find really, really difficult. Actually, more a case of it's not. I understand the object methodology. What I find really hard is deciding what should be an object and what shouldn't be. It's easy enough when you use, if you pick something like Visual Basic, for example, a window is an object, a control is an object, a list is an object. I can follow that quite easily. But if I go to something like C++ or C#, then object orientation, if I'm not working with a visual metaphor, then I find it really hard trying to work out what should be an object. Well, frozen screen. I don't know, about 5 nights a week at the moment. Coomp, thank you very much for following. That's absolutely fantastic of you. Thank you. And I'm glad both of you find it relaxing. I can't win this. Maybe. Okay. Okay. See. So. If the yellow's still on a layer by itself, then you can always tighten that blur up. The other way you could do it is, I think Photoshop has an unsharp brush. I know, which if I remember rightly is kind of counter to its name, because I think it sharpens things up. In Coral Painter there's a pinch brush which will sort of drags things together a little bit, so it tends to sharpen up edges, which you might help if that's something you're okay. But it's, try a few things out, Fluffy Twiggler. It didn't look bad. It just looked a bit furry for lightning. Lightning is kind of clean and crisp, and So that was just, you know, just my observation. If you like it furry, you like it furry. A blurred furry tends to mean the same thing. Anyway, what I'm doing now is lightening up these, for those people that have not seen this before, I'm now lightening up these blocks around here. They're fairly dim, and what I want to do is, as I've done on this side, is put some mortar in between them so that they don't float in mid-air, which is what these are doing. If I put the mortar in at this, with them this dark, it will basically just merge into one big mass, and it'll be quite hard to see where the blocks are. So what I'm doing now is I'm just lightening them up a little bit, so when I put the mortar in between, you can see that, you can still see the blocks as being distinct from the mortar as the background. And what we may do as we go along as well is add just a little bit of texture. I probably will go over them, well, I will be going over them again to add more texture into the blocks, so they don't look like sort of just flat grey shapes. They actually start to look three-dimensional, as some of these over here have started to do so. And you know, this around here, just around the window, these two stones here, they've got a little bit of texture built in, so you can sort of see them as not being flat pieces of card. They actually look like a three-dimensional object that's, you know, rough cut stone. Do you need the other light on? No. Okay. And since we do have one or two new people in the stream, Scraperboard, if you're not familiar with what it is and you're interested, if you're not interested, then I'm afraid you might want to silence your stream for a little bit. But what this is it's a layer of thin card from this particular manufacturer, a layer of thin card which has been coated with porcelain clay, which is a very white looking clay, and then once that's been dried, it's then covered with a layer of Indian ink, a very black non-water soluble ink. And then what Scraperboard or Scratchboard, it's also known as, scraping, all sorts of words along the same sort of lines, is using a sharp tool, and that's essentially what this thing is here. It's just really a sharp point to scrape away the black ink that's over the top of the white, revealing some of the white clay that's underneath. And depending on how you do it, in terms of directions, how thick you or how hard you press, how big a line you scrape, how many lines you create in a particular area, determines basically how white it looks, and therefore you can create all the shades of grey that go together to make up this style of artwork, which is a style that I describe as photorealistic or photorealism. It doesn't look like a photograph. I'm not that experienced to be able to create that good an effect, although some artists are. But it's a style which doesn't draw an outline around things. It draws on what you might see in a photograph. So you've got lots of shades. You don't have an outline around things. You've actually got to create it so it looks like real life rather than looking like a cartoon, or what's also known as illustration style. Oh dear. Okay. I've just noticed that I've got just the corner of the board has just soaked up some water. So I'm going to see what happens when it dries. If it doesn't go away, I'm going to have to cut about 1/2 inch off the top of this board, because it's kind of, at the moment, it's kind of just bulged out a little bit. Eddie Fall Guy, good evening. Welcome to the studio this evening. Nice to see you again. How's your cocktail stick thing going? Also, what I'm doing here is just adding lots more fine scratches to all of the stones. At this stage I'm trying to keep doing it in the same direction of the texture that I already sort of started to establish, i.e. the direction in which I did the lines already, because I've done them at various angles. They're not all left and right, up or down, so that I did them that way on purpose so that they have a visual cue that they should be textured, because they don't go all the same way. But essentially all I'm doing at the moment is just adding a few more of the fine scratches, and as I mentioned earlier, the more scratches in a particular area, the whiter that particular bit looks, so it starts to just raise the lighting level. Yeah, okay. You're doing the purple stuff, and I was going to say it's got a white star, but it had a white star the last time I saw it. You do know that's rotated 90 degrees, don't you? That's not very good, 84 guy. Can't go around hurting yourself like that. Crazy Joe 471, hello. What are you doing? Talking to the camera and saying hello, Crazy Joe. 471. Just there it mentions Scratchboard, scratching images into black ink. That's effectively what I'm doing, Crazy Joe. It's an art form called Scratchboard, Scraperboard, scraping, quite a few things, but all along the lines of removing the black surface over the top of white clay to produce an image. Thank you very much, Crazy Joe. That's very kind of you. Do you do any form of art yourself, Crazy Joe? Or are you just enjoying watching what goes on in creative? Just extended the highlight there just around the window a little, window edge a little bit. Just makes that edge of the window stand out. Makes it a little bit more visible. I'm just going to file this tool and do it not over the top of the artwork. Don't particularly want to get a little filing of metal that drops onto it, and then as I brush it away it scratches. So. Okay. 6.8 miles of orienteering. You did it in 3 hours. That's quite a fast walk. Okay. Crazy Joe. That's an interesting art form, shall we say. I'm from the UK, from around about the middle of the UK in a county called Yorkshire. Little bit smaller than Arizona. And welcome back, Fear Reaper. And Graya, hello, welcome to the studio this evening. You're just in time. Not just in time for anything, just in time. That one made me jump. Crazy Joe 471, thank you very much for following. That's most fantastic. Thank you very much for doing that. They sometimes catch me unawares. It's very slightly loud, I guess, and it just comes on really suddenly. Dear. Sometimes if I'm concentrating a bit on what I'm doing, it does startle me somewhat, and very occasionally you will actually see me jump. Of course, if you're watching and not following and want to try and make me jump, I don't mind. Right, just on this edge here I want to be a little bit careful. I don't want to get I want to lighten up the stones, but I don't want to get as light as the ones next to it, because I want that edge to be visible, quite clearly visible, so that you actually sort of can recognise that as the edge of this part of the building is separate from that bit of the building. Yeah, there's always a VOD if you really that want to catch up, Graya. There is, yeah, talking of VOD, if you're not, again, if it's a term you're not familiar with, video on demand, all of the streams are recorded, although only, I think Twitch only keeps them for 2 weeks, so the last 2 weeks worth of streams are recorded if anybody wants to take a look back over them and see what might have gone on in an earlier stream. For example, about a week ago, before we started doing this, on one stream we did pyrograph a sleeping fox and a fox that's awake on the door hanger, so that was done in one stream, so you should find that in there. And before that we were doing a larger pyrographic piece of an elephant and a giraffe on an African savannah, which was done at sunset. I think at the moment the end of that is probably still available as a recording. That one. Okay, now most, if not all of those, that stone's still a little bit dark. Most, if not all of these stones now look a lot brighter than they did before. So what I'm missed a couple down here. So what I'm going to do now is put some mortar in between them. As I mentioned earlier, this will stop them looking like they're floating in mid-air, and make them start to look as though they're actually joined together. And now what that involves is just lots and lots of little tiny, fairly faint scratches between each of these stones. I need to be really light because I don't want I don't actually want the area to get too bright, because then you won't be able to see the edge of the stones. So very, very fine marks, very, very fine scratches. You probably won't see the scratches, but you will probably see like a grey area start to move across the something flashed. Move across the the image, the piece, as I do areas between each of the bricks. Okay, Gray. Well, I'm glad somebody's watching them. I'm glad somebody's watching them. At some point, I sort of fully intend probably to turn them into or most of them into a time lapse, because I do have recordings of all of them, and then I'll upload the time lapse onto up to YouTube. But that'll be, it won't be for a while. Now you should start to see this bottom area now look sort of grey between the stones. That's sort of the mortar, or that's the effect I'm looking for, to sort of just tie them together a little bit. That grey may get a bit lighter in time as we do, more texturing around the stones, but we'll see how that goes. I have a tendency, or I prefer, to work from dark to light, so I'll start with things perhaps being dimmer than they will be. It's whilst it is possible and quite valid to I'll say repair Scraperboard if you scratch some areas that you didn't want to scratch, or you've made them too deep, or too white. Basically, you can repair them. You can effectively just apply some more ink into the area that you didn't want to be scratched. That ink will then, of course, turn the top surface of the clay black, and I won't say it's invisible, but certainly if you're going to do any more scraping over the top of it, then it will effectively be an invisible repair, and you just carry on with as though it was never there. But it's a lot easier to, shall we say, to get it right first time. Well, whilst I might not get it right first time, if I started with extremely light scratches, then I've got more scope to change how it looks. If I've gone in too deep, to scratch too deep, or too white, basically, the only way I've got of doing anything about that is, well, one way is the ink that I just mentioned. The other way will be to make everything else around it lighter still, but you can only go so far. So I find it easier to start with thin scratches, which I can make deeper or more numerous if necessary, and if it's not necessary, then job's done. was saying, I mean, I'm using a special tool here, by the way, just talking about Scraperboard again. It doesn't have to be a special tool, it literally can be anything that's got a sharp edge. Piece of broken glass, hypodermic needle, edge of a pliers, pin, a sewing needle, scalpel blade, a pencil sharpener blade, anything basically like that. Wire brush, they get used quite a bit. Fiberglass cleaning pencil. I suppose you could even use the needle out of an airbrush if you really wanted to. Probably one that you'd bust rather than a brand new one, but you can literally use anything that will scratch. You couldn't, for example, you couldn't very easily use something like a ballpoint pen or even a pencil, because they won't actually scratch quite won't scratch easily at the very least. And since it's the scratch through the black which actually creates the whiteness, you do need to be able to get through that black ink. And as I've also discovered, you might, for example, not really want to use your best pair of scissors or best pen knife, for example, because I have discovered that the clay really rather quickly does blunt blades. I've probably mentioned a couple of times now, I've just taken a file to this tool. Part of that's me being a cheapskate, but that's the reason I'm taking the file to it is because it become blunt. It's not creating the fine lines anymore, or I'm having to apply too much pressure. So me filing it is being a cheapskate, really. But you know, these nibs, I forgot what it is now. They're about, let's say, 50 UK pence a piece. 50, like 50 euro cents, half a dollar. So yeah, well, I suppose it's been more than half a dollar, but they're of that sort of order each. So I would have gone through at least one, possibly two so far on this piece. So it can add up. And as I say, it's I'm a cheapskate. I don't like throwing stuff out like these, blades, just because I say just because they're blunt. If they're blunt, they're not much use to me. But when it doesn't take much more than a file just to make them usable again, then I hate wasting things. Right. Cagliati. I still have a problem with your name. Welcome back. Nice to see you in the studio again. I know where it comes from. I recall the story, and I am still got a problem trying to say it. I guess the easiest way is Kylie-arty, but yes, thank you very much, Kylie-arty. I keep hearing the Moriarty in my head, and then trying to put Kylie with Moriarty, but just the bit at the end of it, that's tripping me up a bit. But thank you. Unfortunately, Kylie, though, you've joined at what might be an inopportune moment, really, because I'm just about to wrap up for this evening. Let me zoom back out and tip the camera up so people can see what we've done so far. So there, excuse me covering the face camera. You're looking at the back of the board at the moment on that particular camera. Yeah, there is always the VOD, Kylie, as well, if you do want to catch up on what has been going on. At least you can skip through the boring bits on that. So this is how we've got so far. What we've been doing tonight is in both, well, the main bit of the cottage here, we have been lightening the stones. So what we were able to do then is to put what would be the mortar in between them, so you can see that they now tie together, and you can see them sort of, if you like, glued together. They form a wall now, rather than over here where they still look like they're sort of floating in mid-air. Fear Reaper 7 looks great, thank you very much. Kylie looks great, thank you. Yeah, so far. It may not stay that way, but let's hope it does. So yes, we've lightened them up. We've put some, well, it scrapes if you like, but we've put some mortar between them now, between the stones, so that they're tight together. They look like a wall. They're not floating. Next thing is to do the same thing on the end of this part of the building. Lighten those up so that we can actually put the mortar in there between them as well. And then once we have that mortar in there, we'd then add more texture to these stones to actually sort of, they still look rather flat at the moment. If it was that good, wouldn't need advertising. Yeah, so once we've added the mortar in there, we actually start to texture some of these bricks, I call them bricks, but the stones, a little bit more, so they don't look quite so flat at the moment. So you can see I've done little tiny bits just around it, so they actually sort of look more like 3D stones. And my sort of favourite area at the moment is just this. There's one just in here for that. If I can get this camera to focus on the area that I want. Yeah, where this area here where the stones turn the corner. I was zoomed in a little bit more earlier. It's a little bit dark, but they kind of look like real stones, just because of the little imperfections in the surface, which just tickled me. But so that's what's going to happen next. Is doing some work on the walls. The thatch needs some more work, but that'll come later, and then there'll be some work done to put a path in, and maybe some grass to ground this cottage so it actually sort of sits on something rather than floating in mid-air at the moment. And what I may actually, well, I'm very likely to do, since I'm going to try it at some point, is around the path is on the bottom is going to be probably a small area of grass, and I've actually got some green ink. which in theory is specially formulated and designed, as in we're going to sell it more expensive because we're telling you that. But I've got some green, and actually going to put a little, certainly on the grass, put a little bit of the green ink so we get green grass. See what it looks like. Whether we'll do any more colouring, I'm not sure. But there we go. Anyway, that's the cottage so far for this evening. Can you see some of my airbrushing? Okay, I've got at least one piece I can show you. Let me just put this to one side, and I don't scratch this. Well, I suppose I can show you. I can show you a few pieces actually, just so you can see how I got better. So I have a tendency when I'm doing well, anything, just to just do something, just to see what it comes out like. So this is a very early bit of airbrushing, which I was just playing about with one day. I actually had a sheet of blue, and I was just wondered what on earth to do with it. So I did that. But it was partly an excuse to try to see if I could get that effect of the blades, and the fact that things were spinning in there, so the column. So it was more an excuse to practice that. So I wasn't very good. There's no shading on there. It doesn't look very 3D, but it was a very early piece. And I learned something from it, which was, well, a couple of things from it. One is getting a really nice smooth blue background, and how to create that rotor disc. So that was one of the things. I said I'd done an elephant before when I did the pyrography. This was the elephant. So again, sort of a fairly early piece. I can't actually get too much further back on that one, but again, starting, doing animals is quite difficult when when you don't know what you're doing, basically. So this was just something to try, and literally I probably picked what was probably the hardest thing to do, because an elephant of course does have lots of wrinkles and things, and I didn't do very well on it, but there's enough of a texture there. It's not a very good texture, but it again, one of the things I learnt from this is some of the shading, which, like, so the areas here, for example, where you can see it's the edge of, or the top edge of the trunk, shading around it, around to create the head structures. So it was, and shadows. So so that's some of what I learned from doing this. But a later piece. Let's go a little bit better. I've had some water dropped on this from somewhere. Anyway, but this is a monochrome piece. Now this is actually it's a new old western town in Spain. It's a film set stroke tourist attraction. So it is actually used as a western town film set, but when it's not being used as that, it's actually a tourist attraction. You can go around it, go in the buildings, and what have you. So that is working well. This is the first time I used a new airbrush that I got, which was a Infinity. I'll show you the airbrush in a minute. Because the Infinity allowed me to do really fine lines, that's what, with all the clapboard and things on here, there's a heck of a lot of fine lines. This was all done freehand, no masking anywhere, no shields. It was literally all done freehand with a 0.15 millimeter nozzle. And the one thing, the thing I was specifically trying to learn on here was sand, and I didn't do very well. Subsequently, I've learnt more about sand, and basically, they need to, if I'm going to try it with an airbrush, need to turn the pressure down and actually cause it to splatter rather than spray, and that gives you the sand texture. But this is kind of a close texture. I didn't quite get it as sandy looking as I wanted. It sort of does look a bit rough in real life. The camera's smoothing it out a little bit, but there we go. And the airbrush for that is well, I'll show you the airbrushes, might as well, since we're just talking about airbrushes. This isn't an art form I'm doing on stream at the moment, guys, but it is well, as you can see, it's something that I do. So we've got, I have three. Yeah, I have three. Which once you start doing this stuff, you collect airbrushes, to be honest. But so I'm being a little bit I've been what shall we say, I haven't bought many yet. This isn't a starter airbrush these days, but it was. These are made, there's two of them here, are made by Iwata, which is a quality maker of airbrushes. There's others out there. Badger is another common one that's used used a lot, shall we say, and there's quite a lot of other names out there. Research suggests that using a quality airbrush is worth it. This particular airbrush, all of these airbrushes are what they call double acting. So what that means is you push the button down to get air and you pull it back to get paint, and it comes out of this end. So paint goes in the cup at the top there, air goes in the bottom here, and essentially that's all there is to it. But this is an Iwata. It's called a CS Eclipse CS. It's also a nice airbrush for covering large areas. Modelers use this sort of airbrush quite a lot. The Infinity I mentioned is this one. It's got a needle cap on it at the moment because the needle actually sticks out at the end. Can't really show you the needle. I'll try and focus on it, but this needle is tiny. Let me zoom in and I'll try and focus just to show you the needle. There you go. Now the bit that's sticking out at its widest is 0.1, well, it's under 0.15 millimeters, and at its tip it's obviously a lot finer than that. And the cap stays on it because if you bend that, you effectively can't get it out. You can't spray with a bent airbrush, a bent needle. It just doesn't come out at all. And if you bend it, you'd be lucky to get it out without damaging the nozzle. So effectively, if you do bend it, you replace it and the nozzle all in one go. Most likely because you couldn't get it out without pulling the nozzle out. But that's why there's a cap stays on the end of that. Let me zoom back out again. But that's this is called an infinity. It's actually called a 2-in-1 because they actually supply 2 needles and 2 nozzles. So I can actually change the needle and the nozzle in here because they're a matched pair to 0.4mm if I need it, which gives me quite a wide spray. And I can also change the cup. That's all nice because this cup will unscrew. There we go, and come off, and you can put a wider cup on if necessary. This too is a double acting. Push down for air, pull back for paint. This one has an additional facility in that there's a capability on the back here of setting how far this needle will go back. So now I can't pull this back any further than that. If I take that off, I can pull it all the way back. This is quite a useful thing if you want to create fine lines, because it stops you accidentally creating a great big fat one. But that's a really nice airbrush. And this one is also a nice airbrush. I actually find when I'm using these that because you hold it like essentially like this, or I tend to hold it like a pencil really. After an hour or so, my finger starts to hurt with this because of the fine control you need. So what I've been experimenting with is using this. This is still a double acting airbrush. As soon as you pull this trigger you get air, and then when you pull it a little bit more you get paint. It has slightly less control than the other two, because what you can do with these is you push for air and you pull back for paint, but while you've got the paint pulled back you can modulate the air by letting the trigger come off. So you can create like a splatter, for example, I was talking about with the sand. I can't do that with this one. Once I pull the air on, I've got air, I can't modulate it, and then I pull further for paint. And this one again, I've got 2 nozzles and needles for this, so this is 0.5 and I think a 0.2. So it goes almost as fine as that, and it goes as wide as that. And this operates a little bit more like a spray gun, if you like, but I'm using my finger in this position, the trigger position, which I find a little bit more comfortable. Now you notice this one doesn't have a paint cup on it. It's because it's separate. And it can either be used left-handed or right-handed, so it will either go in that side or it'll go in this side. But you can also put a these are what are called top feed or gravity feed airbrushes. You can get ones where the bottle is below, and it's called a suction feed. This airbrush will do both. By putting the cup in the top there, I've got gravity feed. If I put a different adapter in, I can put it down to a bottle and I've got a suction feed. So it will actually do both, but that's also a really nice airbrush. Again, it's an Iwata. It's called a TR for trigger, and I think there's 2 or 3 in the range. These are well, certainly these two are by no means the best. These are beginner quality. Oh, that's a beginner level. That one's a bit more. This isn't a beginner. This is sort of an intermediate. But once you go up into the Badger and Iwata ranges, you can get some really top quality, really fine, expert level brushes for airbrushing. Can you see the PC case? I can try. Let me unscrew this and then let me just put a BRB screen up. I will stay around, but while I'm unscrewing this, it'll go all over the place, make people see. I'll unmute that so I can still talk to you, but let me just unscrew. this camera. Come on, unscrew it, there we go. Now I've got to feed the wires. Push the right button, so that's the top. Lighting, I'm afraid, is going to be a bit bad. So just on the top, I was talking. As Adi knows, the theme of this was an aquarium. It's a water-cooled PC. I'm not sure about the focusing, I'm afraid, because I'm obviously stood quite a way away from it. But that's. Put the light help. There we go. That might help a little bit. Again, the glasses I'm wearing, I can't see whether what I'm showing is in focus there. I can vaguely see that I'm showing it there, and unfortunately I can't reach that either at the moment. But you've got sort of coral and some seaweed and various tropical fish and a dolphin in there. I think there is somewhere in there is a turtle as well. So there we go. There you go. I would have that upside down, wouldn't I? I'll just flip that camera. Let me see if I can flip that camera before. No, I'll tell you what, I'll just hold it upside down. There we go. Yes, that's right, Eddie Fall Guy. I've got it. There's a plug-in which stores whatever the mic volume is on a particular scene when you switch. So that BRB screen, I have the mic muted, or it was when I was switching before. So when I switch to that, it immediately mutes it. And when I go to broadcast, it puts the mic live. Saves me, generally speaking, from forgetting to make the mic live. So there you go. That's the PC. And that's the first. That was why I started airbrushing, to do that, and that was the first thing that I actually, apart from lots of dots and daggers, that was the first thing that I sprayed with the airbrush, and the whole case, even the blue, was done with the airbrush, and it was all done with not with that one, with this one. Everything. All the blue, it's actually blue inside as well, inside and out, and then all the fish and things were done with that. You learn a heck of a lot about masking, if nothing else, and about not using an airbrush to spray a case with, not one colour. I would use a larger touch-up gun these days if I wanted to do another case to do it, and it was clear coated with cans, which spray cans, which was not a good idea, but it was the only thing I had available to me at the time. These days, again, I'd use a big air. I'd use a single. Sorry, what I'm trying to say is I'd use a single part clear these days. Sprayed with a touch-up gun, not out of a can. But paints do I use for airbrushing? My favourite paints are ETAC, like this one, for example, made by ETAC, or it has been up to now, shall we say. These are acrylic, so they're water based rather than solvent based, and there's a whole range of colours. These smell nice actually, which is one of the main reasons, because doing the airbrushing in the house, these smell nice, so that was one benefit of them. For some reason, well, for an obvious reason, this paint manufacturer gets, or this paint gets referred to as the colour cows. Unfortunately, it's not fantastically available in the UK. I used to get some of it from the Netherlands. I've not done any airbrushing for a while, so I've still got quite a bit of a stock. But I think these days I'd probably try out some of the Createx paint. I've forgotten what it is now, but there's a new range in Createx which is supposed to be very good. As a beginner, I did get some of this, which is Comat. Comat you can spray direct from the bottle. It smells horrible though. Really does. Not a very nice smell. I don't know why. This stuff you can spray from the bottle, but I generally prefer to reduce it, and it sprays really smoothly. Netherlands, yeah. Marissa, somebody or other, I've forgotten. Most of the Createx stuff isn't bad. The Auto Air actually isn't bad paint, which is one of their ranges. Let me see if I can see the one I was thinking of. I'm just looking up now. Of course, the website I've currently gone to is deciding to go slow. Paint. Wicked. Also, yeah, the Creative Wicked used to be the supposedly the best of the Createx range for use by, for artists, if you like. The illustration stuff is and Trident. They're the two new ones. Triton isn't Createx, I don't think, but I've not tried that. That is supposed to be a really fine paint. With acrylic paint, your paint is a pigment. It's not a dye. It's a pigment means it's solid basically, and it's ground really fine, and then suspended in a liquid. And the thing you need for airbrushing, especially some of the really fine nozzles, is that it has to be ground really fine to basically not clog the nozzles. Because although the nozzle itself, I mentioned, is 0.15 millimeters, that's with the needle fully withdrawn, and you don't often shoot paint with a needle fully withdrawn. You usually got it only just cracked, if you like, so you're talking about hundredths of a millimeter that the paint's actually coming through. So the viscosity of the liquid and the thickness, if you like, of the pigment makes a big difference. And this works really nice. Even the white, which is white and black are notorious colours. White, because to get a good white they actually have to use a rather a lot of pigment in the paint to get coverage, so it's always heavily loaded with pigment, and that makes it clog or a phenomenon called tip dry really easily. And black is always a problem because it also contains a lot of pigment, but it contains a lot of different colours of pigment, because black isn't black. It's usually dark brown or dark blue, or basically a mix of all of them to get it really, really dark. Even something called carbon black often isn't actually black. as you see sometimes, and you see it with a phenomenon called colour shift, where if you put white over black, for example, you don't get grey. You might get blue. Just that sort of weird thing. So Trident and the Creatix illustration, which is supposedly for illustrators, if you like, working on paper where they need really fine airbrushes. That's supposed to be good. I've not tried either though. Not tried either. So I can't really say any more than they're supposed to be really good. Yeah, just the standard Createx airbrush colours. I have a couple of those. The Creative airbrush and the Autowear, very similar. If I remember rightly, very similar paints. Not a lot of difference in formulation between the two, so you can, any of the Creatix paints you can mix and match anyway. You know, you don't actually have to stick to a range. If you like a colour in a different range, you can use it. The Autowear paints do spray really nicely. I've used a few for working on paper, so you don't actually, even though it says Autowear for cars and things like that, you can use them on other things. They just most of it is Autowear, for example, is designed to be sprayed through the larger spray guns, so 0.5 nozzles and things like that, which are used in automotive for large areas of colour, but will also work through an airbrush for the smaller artists who work on cars and stuff like that, so the paints are compatible. But yeah, no, they should be okay. There's nothing wrong with Creative. The big names like that, they tend to be okay. Some people get on better with one paint rather than another. As I say, I do have some Createx. I prefer the ETAC. There's just me. I find them easier to work with. I did try. I don't think Creatix are selling it anymore. They did do a range, which I can't remember what it was called now. Just before they brought what's their current Autowear range out, and they were quite nice to use. So it's really what you get on with. You learn how to mix your paints. You learn how to use them, and whichever works for you really. And it's, if you're finding a range of paints doesn't work particularly well, you're not finding it sprays particularly well, if you can afford to do so, try a different one, a different manufacturer or a different range. You might just find it's slightly different formulation means it works better in the way you want to use it. Okay, just had a moth fly by. Theme Hospital, hello, good evening. I'm going to wrap up now. It's now gone 3/4 of an hour past. I'd probably have said something along the lines of usually I understand that the people that ask that are usually looking for a partner. Yeah, if you're confident spraying white, AD, white's the hardest one to work with in any range. So if you wanted to just try a single bottle, then white would be the one to try, because as I say, it's the hardest one usually to spray because of the high pigment load. If you never use white, use a colour that you're more familiar with. So your green, for example, or your purple that you've been spraying a lot of. Then use a colour that you're more familiar with. Okay. I unfortunately I'm going to say goodnight to everybody. It's gone on a little bit past the time I intended to stop. What I want to do is say thank you everybody for watching and taking part in the chat this evening. And I know we've ranged from Scraperboard to airbrushing this evening, but I don't mind anybody asking questions like that about any of the art forms that I do. It's not a problem. It's useful to have a chat about it, and I might learn something as well, so I don't mind doing that. Having two views of me is somewhat confusing, isn't it? I'm going to do a usual advert if you guys that watch often don't mind, and that is to just say to anybody who's watching that would like to keep up with what I'm doing now and next. If you'd like to follow me, that would be absolutely fantastic. If you don't want to, that's also okay. You can, if you just want to be notified when I go live, follow me on Twitter. Details will be on the end plate in a moment, and they are below the stream window, but basically it's at Zaragonart. I stream 7 nights a week in the UK from approximately 8 PM. That's UK time, 1900 hours GMT, or if you're in a different time zone, if you look at your clock, and I'm sure you've got one on whatever device you're looking at me at the moment on, and subtract 2 3/4 hours. That would be 8 PM in the UK. Current UK time is 10:45. So 2 3/4 hours earlier would be 8 PM. That time tomorrow and subsequent nights. I may stream tomorrow afternoon, depends on what I feel like and what else is going on. I'm not sure about that though, so if I do, it would probably be in about 14 hours time, 3 PM in the UK. But that depends on the weather and what else is going on, guys. So just keep an eye out for me in your favourites or on Twitter for an afternoon stream tomorrow if there's going to be one. Apart from that, everybody, thank you very much. Hope to see you all again. It's been absolutely fantastic. Have a good evening. Bye bye.